Right, before we start, get yourself sorted. Fix your pillow, dim whatever's still glowing in the room, and get properly settled, because we're going to be here a while. There's no rush tonight, nothing to keep up with, nothing you need to remember in the morning. This isn't really the sort of thing you sit and watch. It's the sort you leave running in the dark and let it take you off wherever you end up. Here's what we're doing. Game of Thrones is one of those stories where, if you sit and think about it long enough, you start to notice how much of it balances on almost nothing. A conversation that went one way instead of the other. A sword that came down when it might not have. A man who stood a step too close to someone he'd already beaten. The whole enormous thing, 8 seasons, a continent's worth of scheming, dragons and ice and all the rest of it, it all rests on a handful of very small moments where one person made one choice, and I've always found that quietly fascinating. Not the battles really, the hinges, the little pivots you'd walk straight past if you weren't looking. So tonight we're going to look at 10 of them. 10 places where the story could have tipped a different way. And the one rule I'm holding myself to is this. Every single one starts from a thing that genuinely happened on screen. A moment you could go back and rewatch tomorrow if you liked. From that fixed point, we nudge one small detail sideways. What if this had gone differently? And then we just walk it out a bit and notice what changes and what stubbornly refuses to. I want to be upfront about one thing, because I think it matters. I'm not doing this to fix the show. None of these versions are meant to be improvements. I'm not sitting here going, if only they'd done it this way, it would all have worked out. It's more that when you lift one piece out and look at the gap it leaves behind, you start to see how the whole thing was actually put together, which people were quietly holding it up the whole time without anyone ever saying so. And honestly, that's a lovely thing to think about at the end of a long day. Gentler than it sounds, a few of these are big and sweeping, a single death that reroutes an entire continent. A couple are quieter, sadder, the sort where nothing dramatic happens at all. Someone just quietly doesn't die, and the world tilts. 1 or 2 go somewhere properly dark, I'll warn you now, though I'll keep it soft. And one right at the end is, I think, the closest thing to a happy road that this particular story ever offered anyone. So we'll finish there. You'll notice I've got opinions about all of this, by the way. I'm not going to pretend to be neutral, because I'm not. I loved this show. I argued about it for years. I've got characters I'd defend to the death and choices that still wind me up a little. So you'll hear all that. Take it or leave it. It's just me nattering on about something I like far too much. At an hour when most sensible people are asleep, which with any luck, you're about to be. If you nod off partway through, and I hope you do, that's rather the whole idea, don't fret about it. None of this is going anywhere. There's no plot to lose your place in. It's just me turning things over out loud. So you can rejoin it another night, and it'll all be sitting exactly where you left it. Nothing to catch up on? If you enjoy this sort of thing, and you fancy more of it, there's a subscribe button knocking about somewhere, and I'd be chuffed if you used it. But that's the only time I'll mention it, promise. I'm not going to keep interrupting the wander to ask you for things. That would rather defeat the purpose. Where to begin then? I thought about going in order, starting at the beginning and working forward, but that felt a bit tidy, and this isn't really a tidy sort of story. So instead, we're going to move around a bit. Start big, wander through the quiet ones, dip into the dark, and come out somewhere soft. Think of it less like a timeline, and more like walking through a house at night, opening doors one at a time to see what's in each room. And we'll start with the biggest room of the lot, the one that shifts nearly everything that comes after it. It's the kind of turning point that hides in plain sight. A set of marble steps, a crowd, and a boy king who'd been told to be merciful and decided he'd rather not be. So let's go there first. Let's stand in that crowd, in a city about to tip over into years of war, and let's ask what would have happened if one blade had stayed in its sheath. Comfortable? Good. Off we go. Picture the great Sept of Baelor, that huge marble thing in the middle of King's Landing, all pale stone and steps. the sort of building designed to make you feel small when you look up at it. There's a crowd packed in front of it, the way crowds gather when something dreadful is about to happen, and everyone's told themselves they're only there to watch. And somewhere, in that crush of people, a skinny kid in filthy clothes has climbed up onto the plinth of a statue to get a better view, because she's just realised the man being dragged up those steps in chains is her father. That's where we start, because the thing most people misremember about Ned Stark's death is that it was inevitable. It wasn't. It very nearly didn't happen at all. Here's how it actually went. Ned had been arrested for treason after he made the almighty mistake of telling Cersei he knew the truth about her children, and then trusting the wrong man to back him up. And in the cells, Varys came to him with a deal. A quiet, sensible, deeply un-Ned sort of deal. Confess, stand up in front of the whole city, admit to treason you didn't commit, say the boy on the throne is the true king, and in return you'll be spared. You'll take the black. You'll be sent up to the wall to join the Night's Watch, where your brother Benjen already is, and your son Jon. You'll live. You'll just live somewhere cold and far away and forgotten. And Ned, who valued his honour more than almost anything, who genuinely would rather have died clean than lived a lie, Ned took the deal. Not for himself, for Sansa, because Varys made it very clear that the alternative was his daughter paying the price. So he stood on those steps, and he swallowed everything he was, and he confessed. Said Joffrey was the rightful king, the whole humiliating lot. And it worked. That's the part people forget. It worked. Cersei wanted him alive. A live Ned Stark at the wall is a useful hostage and a defused bomb. Varys wanted him alive. Sansa was right there begging for it. Even Varys was doing his little speech about the virtues of mercy. Everything was arranged. The deal was done. Ned was going to the wall, and then Joffrey, being Joffrey, looked out at the crowd, loving him for it. Decided mercy was for the weak and the womanly, and told Ilyn Payne to bring him the traitor's head. And Payne drew Ned's own sword, that great Valyrian blade ice, and that was that. A flock of pigeons went up, and a little girl on a statue understood, without anyone telling her, that her father was gone. So, what if the boy had listened? What if, for once in his miserable little reign, Joffrey had done the thing everyone around him was frantically signalling him to do, and let his mother's arrangement stand? Ned confesses. Ned lives. Ned goes north in chains and takes the black. What happens then? Well, the first thing to understand is that Ned at the wall is a completely different creature from Ned in a grave. A dead Ned is a martyr, a symbol his son marches to war over. A living Ned is something far more inconvenient and far more interesting. He's a bargaining chip nobody quite knows how to spend. He's the most honourable man in Westeros, stuck in a black cloak at the top of the world, sworn to a watch that everyone in the south treats as a dumping ground for criminals. And I find that quietly poignant. The one man who might have steered the realm decently, filed away somewhere no southern lord would ever think to look. Robb still goes to war, I think. The insult's still there. His father imprisoned, his sister held, his house humiliated. But the fuel is different. In our version, Robb's war is lit by grief. It's vengeance dressed up as justice. Here his father's alive, which means there's always the maddening possibility of getting him back. And that changes how you fight. You don't burn everything down when a rescue's still on the table. You negotiate. You keep doors open. Catelyn especially. A Catelyn whose husband is alive, but out of reach, is a woman playing a longer, colder game than the one grief pushed her into. She spent our timeline making decisions that felt right and turned out catastrophic, mostly because she was frantic. Give her a living husband to bargain for, and some of that frantic energy has somewhere sensible to go. There's a quieter thing underneath all this though, and it's the bit I keep coming back to. Ned Stark ends up at the wall right as the real war, the only war that ever actually mattered, is waking up. Think about the timing. While the whole South is busy tearing itself to pieces over who gets to sit in an uncomfortable chair, the dead are stirring in the true North, and the only people who can see it coming are a few frozen men nobody listens to. Now drop Ned Stark into that, a man with actual authority, a name that means something, a warden of the North, even a disgraced one, standing on the wall next to Jon and telling the Southern Lords that the thing they should be frightened of isn't each other. Would they have listened? Probably not, if I'm honest. That's rather the tragedy of it. The realm's whole problem was that nobody listened to the North until it was far too late. But you'd have had Ned there, steady, sending raven after raven, being ignored, doing the right thing, into an indifferent silence, which is, when you think about it, the most Ned Stark way to spend an apocalypse imaginable. And Jon. Oh, Jon's whole arc bends around this. In our timeline, Jon goes to the wall, carrying this ache about his father, the man who never quite told him who his mother was, who died before Jon could get answers. Here they're together, the bastard son and the father who raised him, standing the same watch. Jon still rises through the watch, I reckon, because that was always in him. But he does it with Ned watching, and that's a different man who comes out the other end. Softer in some ways, steadier, maybe less willing to make the wild, brave, reckless calls that defined him, because there's a father there to counsel caution. Hard to say whether that's better, just different. There's a lovely, sad detail buried in all this too. Ned went to his grave, never telling Jon the truth about his parentage, the great secret he'd carried his whole life, the promise he made to his dying sister. In this version, he's got years at the wall with the boy, long cold nights, not much to do, the truth sitting in his chest the way it always did. Does he tell him? I genuinely don't know. Ned kept that secret through everything, took it to the block rather than risk it, but there's something about the wall, about the sense of an ending up there, that might have loosened his tongue, and a Jon who learns who he really is from his own father, quietly, years early, instead of stumbling onto it through visions and crypts. That's a Jon who might have made very different choices about a throne he never wanted. The knock-on effects spread out from there in every direction, and most of them are quieter than you'd expect. Sansa's captivity in King's Landing carries on, but with a living father as leverage, her value shifts. Arya's still loose in the wild, still slipping into the dark to become whatever it was she became. The war still grinds along, but the emotional weather of the whole thing is different, because the Starks aren't a family defined by a beheading. They're a family with a father in exile. An exile, unlike death, can end. That's the thing about this first road, and it's why I wanted to start here. Ned's death wasn't a natural disaster. It wasn't fate. It was one nasty little boy overruling every adult in the room because he liked how the crowd looked at him when he was cruel. Take that one impulse away, give the deal its chance to work, and the great tragedy that kicks off the entire saga, just quietly, doesn't happen the way it did. The war still comes, because the war was always coming. But the man everyone thought had to die to start it turns out not to have been required at all. He just gets packed off to the cold instead, to spend his last years being right about a threat nobody wanted to hear about, which, knowing Ned, he'd probably have preferred anyway. Let's stay in the early days, but move north and go quiet for this one, because this next turning point is tiny. It's a boy climbing a wall. That's it. That's the moment the whole War of the Five Kings hangs off, and hardly anybody thinks of it that way. Bran Stark loved to climb. His mother had made him promise, over and over, to stop. Winterfell's towers were old and high, and a fall would kill him. And Bran, being 10 and convinced of his own immortality, the way 10-year-olds are, kept climbing anyway. Sort of like how you tell a kid 100 times not to do the one thing, and the 101st time is the one that gets them. And on the day the royal party was visiting, he scrambled up the side of a broken tower, and he climbed past a window he shouldn't have, and he saw something he was never meant to see. Jaime and Sir C. Lannister, brother and sister, together, in a way brother and sister very much should not be. And Jaime, caught with the whole world resting on that secret staying buried, looked at this frightened little boy clinging to the window ledge, said, "The things I do for love," almost gently, and pushed him off. Bran didn't die. That's the first mercy of it. He fell, and he broke, and he dropped into a coma, and his legs never worked again. And while he lay there unconscious, someone sent an assassin to finish the job. A cutthroat with a beautiful Valyrian steel dagger, sent to slit the boy's throat in his sick bed. Catelyn fought the man off with her bare hands until Bran's direwolf killed him, and afterwards she was left holding this dagger, this gorgeous, expensive, out-of-place weapon, and one burning question. Who sends a blade like this to murder a child? And that question is the one that lit the fuse. Years later, Littlefinger, who was lying, obviously, because he always was, put the whole thing rather beautifully. He said that dagger was, in a way, the question that started the entire war, because Catelyn took it south to find out who it belonged to. She got told, falsely, that it was Tyr on Lan Yesses Ters, and so she seized Tyr on the road, dragged him off to the Vale, and the Lannisters and Starks were suddenly at each other's throats before anyone had quite decided to be. One dagger, one question, one boy who climbed when he'd promised not to. So what if he didn't? What if that particular morning Bran kept his promise for once, or climbed a different wall, or looked through a different window, or simply came down for his lunch like his mum wanted? No fall, no coma, no dagger by his bedside, no question for Catelyn to go chasing south. The immediate effect is almost eerie in how much it doesn't happen. Catelyn never takes that dagger to King's Landing. She never grabs Tyr on the road, which means Tywin Lannister never has his excuse to start raiding the Riverlands in retaliation, and the whole slow-motion collision between the two great houses loses its opening shove. Now I want to be careful here, because it's not as if everything suddenly turns to sunshine. The rot was already in the system. Jon Arryn was already dead, murdered for getting too close to the truth. Ned was still going to be dragged south to be Hand of the King, and he was still going to start pulling on the same loose thread that got the last hand killed. The collision was coming, but without Bran's fall it comes slower and messier and along a completely different line. No clean spark, no clear first blow, just a gradual souring instead of a sudden war. But that's the surface of it, and honestly, the surface isn't the bit that keeps me up. The bit that keeps me up is what Bran becomes, and what the world loses if he never becomes it. Because the fall wasn't just an injury, it was the doorway. A broken, bed-bound Bran is a Bran who starts dreaming strange dreams, who ends up dragged beyond the wall by a handful of the strangest, most devoted people in the story, who finds a very old man tangled in the roots of a weirwood tree and inherits from him something ancient and enormous. He becomes the three-eyed raven. And I'll be honest, the show never fully sold me on what exactly that was. A lot of staring meaningfully at trees, but the gist is that he becomes a kind of living memory of the entire world. Every history, every moment, all of it held in one quiet lad in a wheelchair. Take away the fall, and none of that exists. Bran grows up a normal Stark boy, runs about, learns to ride, probably grumbles about his lessons. Lovely for him. But it means that when the great enemy comes for the world's memory, because that was the whole point of the thing, the dead wanted to wipe the slate clean, erase that everything had ever been. There's simply no memory for it to come for. No raven, no target. Which sounds like it might help, until you sit with it, and realise it also means the person who ends up at the heart of the endgame, the still point everything else is arranged around, was manufactured by the exact tragedy we've just undone. There's a strange little knot in that, and I quite like sitting in it rather than pretending to untie it. The worst thing that happened to Bran was also the thing that made him load-bearing. You saved the boy the broken back, and you might just cost the world the one mind that could hold it all together at the end. I don't think there's a tidy answer to which is better. There rarely is with this stuff. And Jaime, funnily enough, is the other person this road transforms, and mostly for the better. In our version, Jaime spends years defined by that push. It's the single worst thing he does on screen, arguably. Not killing a king, not any of the battlefield stuff, but chucking a child out a window to protect a secret. It hangs over his whole redemption arc, like a stain he can never quite scrub out. Take the moment away, and Jaime's still got plenty to answer for. But he's not carrying that particular ghost. The line, "the things I do for love," never gets said, and it's a better world for it, even if it's a stranger one. The thing I love about this road, and the reason I wanted it early, is how small it is. Ned's death was a public spectacle. Thousands of people, a sword and a crowd. This one is just a kid, and a windowsill, and a bad bit of timing. Nobody planned for it to matter. It wasn't a scheme or a battle or a betrayal. It was an accident layered on top of a secret, and it happened to sit directly under the whole realm. And when it gave way, everything above it came down, which is, I think, closer to how the world actually works than all the grand plotting the show is famous for. Most catastrophes don't announce themselves. They're a boy who climbed one tower too many on the wrong afternoon, and a mother left holding a knife, asking a question that would burn a continent trying to answer it. Let's turn to something softer now. Or softer in where it lands anyway, because the thing we're undoing is one of the cruelest hours the show ever put on screen. But stay with me, because this is one of the hopeful ones. There's a song in Game of Thrones called The Rains of Castamere. Lovely tune if you don't know what it means. It's the song House Lan Isista had written about the time they wiped out another house that dared to cross them, wiped them out so completely that all that's left is a song about how thoroughly they were wiped out. So it's less a song and more a threat with a melody. And the reason a whole generation of viewers can't hear the first few notes of it without their stomach dropping is because of a wedding at a place called the Twins. Here's the setup, and it's all about a broken promise. Robb Stark, king in the north, young and winning battle after battle, and absolutely hopeless at the political side of it, had made a deal to secure a crossing over a river he needed. Old Walder Frey, who controlled the crossing, agreed to lend his forces on the condition that Robb marry one of his daughters. Robb agreed, and then Robb went and fell in love with a woman named Talisa, married her instead, and broke the pact. Now in the grand romantic sense, you sort of root for him. Marry for love, stick it to the crusty old lord, all that. But Walder Frey was not a man who forgot a slight, and a broken marriage pact to a proud old house is exactly the kind of wound that festers. Robb tried to patch it up. He offered his uncle Edmure as a replacement groom. Edmure would marry a Frey girl, Roslyn, and Honor would be satisfied. And the Freys said yes, and they laid on a wedding feast. And Robb and his mother Catelyn and his pregnant wife and most of the Northern Army walked in under guest right, which is the most sacred protection in the whole of Westeros. You do not harm a man whose bread you've shared under your roof. And they relaxed, and they drank, and they danced. And then the doors closed, and the band struck up The Rains of Castamere, and Catelyn saw Roose Bolton was wearing armour under his shirt, and understood one heartbeat too late. What followed was not a battle, it was a slaughter. Talisa first, stabbed in the belly, the baby with her. Robb shot down with crossbows. Catelyn's throat opened at the end of it, and the Freys and the Boltons, who'd sold the Starks out to the Lannisters, mutilated Robb's body and paraded it about. And just like that, the whole northern cause, the one genuine chance the Starks had to win their war, was gone in a single evening. Roose Bolton put it plainly as he did it. The Lannisters, he said, send their regards. So, what if Robb had kept his word? What if he'd looked at Talisa, felt everything he felt, and done the hard, unromantic, kingly thing, married the Frey girl anyway, kept the pact, kept his enormous prickly ally on side, what if there's no broken promise, and therefore no wedding, and therefore no closing doors, and no dreadful song? The most obvious change is the simplest one. The Northern Army doesn't get gutted in a single night of betrayal. It stays whole. And a whole Northern Army under Robb Stark was, let's not forget, an army that kept winning. The lad's battlefield instincts were brilliant. It was only ever the scheming that let him down. And here we've patched the exact hole that sank him. With the Freys loyal and Roose Bolton given no opening to turn his cloak, the war in the north looks a great deal healthier. It doesn't guarantee Robb wins the whole thing. The Lannisters had Tywin, and Tywin was a nightmare, but it turns a lost cause back into a live one. And follow that thread out, and it touches nearly everyone I care about. Winterfell never falls to the Boltons, which means Ramsay Bolton, and I'll not dwell on Ramsay, because he's the sort of character you're glad to have less of, never gets his hooks into the place, or into Sansa. Theon's whole grim, tortured storyline reroutes entirely, because there's no Bolton dungeon for him to be broken in. Sansa's path away from King's Landing leads somewhere completely different, because home is still standing and still Stark, and little Arya, who in our version arrived at the gates of the twins after the massacre had already started and got dragged away, having seen the very worst of it. Arya just arrives at a wedding. A normal, boring, happy wedding with too much wine and a band playing something that isn't a threat. She gets her family back. Imagine that. That's the image I keep landing on with this one, and it's why I've filed it under the hopeful roads, even though it grows out of such a horror. A version of the North where the Starks aren't scattered to the winds and picked off one by one, but simply together. Robb winning the kind of war he was actually built to win. Catelyn alive to see her son crowned properly, rather than dying in the middle of watching him murdered. Talutsa and the baby, who never even got a name on screen, getting to be a family instead of a gut punch. Now I'm not going to pretend it's all roses because that's not honest, and this show never was. Even if Robb wins his war, the North still sits directly in the path of the thing coming down from beyond the wall, and no amount of political success down south does a blind bit of good against the dead. A triumphant Robb Stark, king in the north, secure on his throne at Winterfell, is still a Robb Stark who's going to look up one winter and see the true enemy arrive, the one nobody in the south ever took seriously. So it's not a clean, happy ending. It's more that this particular family gets to face the real ending together, on their feet, in their own home, rather than being wiped off the board years early by a grubby little betrayal at somebody else's dinner party. And there's a quieter thing underneath all of it that I find genuinely moving. Robb's great flaw was that he led with his heart in a game that punished exactly that. He married for love when a king couldn't afford to, and it killed him and nearly everyone he was responsible for. This road is the one where the heart doesn't cost him everything, where a young man gets to make a slightly colder choice and lives, and who knows, maybe grows to care for the Frey girl, the way his own parents grew to care for each other, which is a thing Catelyn actually tried to tell him, more or less in those words, and he brushed off. Sometimes the gentlest what if is just, what if the kid had listened to his mum? It comes up more than you'd think in this story. It's about to come up again, in a very different way, but we'll get there. Let's sit with the good version of the twins for a moment first, the one with no closed doors, and a band that only ever plays for dancing. Now let's go a long way east and let's go quiet again, because this one's got a stillness to it. It happens at dawn, at the edge of a vast grass sea, over the embers of a fire that's just burned down to nothing. D. Nair Is Targair En started the story with almost nothing. A brother who bullied and frightened her, a name that used to mean something and now mostly meant exile, and 3 fossilized dragon eggs she'd been given as a wedding present. Stone eggs, beautiful, ancient, and about as likely to hatch as the rocks on a beach, because dragons had been dead and gone for a very long time, and everyone treated the eggs as ornaments, pretty heirlooms, the sort of thing you put on a shelf. Then everything fell apart for her, the way it kept doing in those early days. Her husband, Khal Drogo, took a wound that turned bad, and a woman she'd tried to save, a healer called Miri Mazdur, who had rather a lot of reasons to hate the Dothraki, took her revenge through the healing. Drogo ended up alive but empty, gone somewhere behind his own eyes and never coming back. Dany lost the baby she was carrying, and in the end she did the kindest, most terrible thing, and smothered the shell of the man she loved with her own hands. And then she built him a funeral pyre. And she did something that, by every rule anyone knew, should simply have killed her. She put the 3 stone eggs into the fire. She had the Magi lashed to the pyre too, and when the flames were roaring, she walked into them. Ser Jorah tried to stop her, thought she meant to burn herself alive out of grief, begged her to think of the eggs they could sell, the life they could still have. She kissed his cheek and walked in anyway. At dawn the fire died down, and there she was, sitting in the warm ash, naked and sooty and completely unharmed, with 3 newly hatched dragons crawling over her, one on her shoulder, spreading its little wings and screaming at the sky, and the handful of Dothraki left standing dropped to their knees. Because dragons were back in the world, and she'd brought them, and nothing after that was ever going to be the same. That's the moment the whole rest of her story stands on. What if the fire was just fire, though? What if she walked in, and the flames were flames, and the eggs stayed stone? What if Dany survives because she was always tougher than anyone gave her credit for, but comes out of that pyre with nothing but ash and grief, and 3 cracked cold shells that never woke up? You get a Duneir Is Targaryen, who is, in every way that the world measures these things, no one. And I think that's the quietly devastating part. All the fire and the fury and the mother of dragons of it, strip the dragons out, and what's left is a young widow with a Targaryen name and no army, wandering the east with a few loyal men, and a claim to a throne on the other side of the world that not one living soul has any reason to take seriously. Her brother, Visir Ess, used to rant about waking the dragon, about the terrible power of their blood, and everyone rightly thought he was a deluded fool. Without hatching those eggs, Dany's blood is exactly as empty a boast as his was, which is a bleak sort of symmetry, given how his story ended. Follow it forward, and the great liberation arc, the one that made you love her, just doesn't happen. All those cities in Slava's Bay that she broke open, the armies she freed, the Misa of the crowds lifting her up, none of that works without dragons behind it. The whole reason a teenage exile could march on a slaver city and win was that she had weapons out of legend at her back, and the sheer nerve to use them. Take the dragons away, and she's got the nerve, and nothing to point it with. Maybe she frees a few people through cunning and will, but she doesn't conquer. She doesn't build. She doesn't become the thing that half a continent starts whispering about. And she never crosses the sea. That's the big one. In our version, the entire back half of the story is shaped by the knowledge that there's a dragon queen coming, that eventually all that eastern power is going to load onto ships and land in Westeros and rewrite the board. Without dragons, there's no armada worth fearing, no Tyr on sailing west as her hand, no great Targaryen return at all. The Game of Thrones just carries on being a squabble between the same tired houses, with no wildcard riding in from across the water to upend it. But here's the thread that turns this from a political what-if into something colder, and it's the one I always end up chasing. The dragons weren't only a weapon for the throne. They were, as it turned out, one of the only things in the entire world that actually worked against the whites. Let me explain that properly, because it matters and it's easy to skate over. The army of the dead, the White Walkers and the endless whites they raised, could not be stopped by ordinary steel. You could hack a white apart, sure, but there were always more, and the walkers themselves shrugged off normal weapons entirely. There were really only two things that could kill them for good: dragonglass, obsidian, volcanic glass, which you had to mine and shape and get into enough hands to matter, and Valyrian steel, which was rarer still, a handful of ancestral blades scattered across the noble houses. That was it. That was humanity's entire arsenal against extinction. Some glass and a few old swords, and then, right at the end, dragon fire, because it turned out a dragon's flame could burn the dead the way nothing else could take down whole swathes of them at once. So a world with no dragons is a world going into its darkest hour, with 2/3 of its meagre toolkit missing. No fire from the sky to thin the horde. No dragon queen arriving with the means and the will to fight a war the southern lords didn't even believe in. Just glass and old steel, and a wall that everyone had stopped taking seriously. When you lay it out like that, the pyre at dawn wasn't only the birth of a conqueror. It was, without anyone knowing it for years and years, one of the few things standing between the living and a very long, very cold night. Which is why I can't quite file this under the sad but simple roads, even though it feels like one. It looks at first like a small mercy. A grieving girl doesn't get dragged into a life of fire and war, gets to be an ordinary person, somewhere warm. And maybe for her, on a human level, that would have been kinder. But you pull the thread all the way out to the end, and you find those 3 cold eggs sitting at the bottom of everything, and you realise how much the world was quietly leaning on them. 3 stones that never learn to fly, and a night that comes anyway, with far fewer things left to hold it back. Let's pause there for a second. We're 4 roads in, and that's a fair bit of the world we've quietly unpicked, so there's no need to hold on to any of it. Let it sit loose. Take stock of where you actually are for a second. The mattress under you, the warmth of the covers, the small background noises you'd usually tune straight out, pipes ticking somewhere, a fridge humming, the odd car going by, all of it ordinary, all of it steady, and all of it still there, whether you stay awake for the rest of this or not. That's the handy thing about wondering, really. It asks nothing of you. There's no problem here to solve, no ending you've got to reach. You can set these maybes down the second they stop being interesting, and they cost you nothing. So do that. Let them drift past like they belong to someone else, a long way from this room. And when you're ready, no rush, we'll wander back you toward the middle of the map, to a night on the water when a whole war very nearly ended in a completely different place, over the sound of a bay full of ships and a green fire that shouldn't exist. Right, back to the middle of the map, and back to a proper bit of warfare for this one. Blackwater Bay, at night, and a fleet coming in with the tide. I've got a soft spot for Stannis Boorath Ian, and I'll defend it. He's nobody's favourite, no charm, no warmth, grinds his teeth about the letter of the law, while everyone around him is off being charismatic. But he was arguably the man with the best actual claim to the throne, and he knew it, and it drove him half mad that nobody cared. Robert's younger brother, rightful heir by every rule that supposedly mattered, and when the war kicked off, Stannis was the one who came at King's Landing directly, by sea, with the bulk of the royal fleet and an army at his back, aiming to take the city and the throne in one hard stroke, and he very nearly did. This is the thing. On the night of the Battle of the Blackwater, King's Landing was barely defended, the boy king was worse than useless, and Stannis' ships were pouring into the bay. The only thing standing between him and the throne was Tyr E on Lan Ister, who'd been left holding the city as acting hand, and was, to everyone's surprise, including his own, quite good at it. And Tyr Eon had one card. A vast, secret stockpile of wildfire, that lurid green alchemist's fire that burns hotter than anything natural and can't be put out with water, which he floated out into the bay in a single ship and detonated in the middle of Stannis' fleet. The whole harbour went up green, ships and men burning on the water. It was horrific, and it was brilliant, and it broke the back of the naval assault in one blast. Even then, Stannis kept coming, got his men ashore, threw them at the walls, nearly took the city by sheer bloody-minded persistence. What finished it was the cavalry arriving at the last possible moment. Tywin Lan, Aestir, and the freshly bought Tyrell army, sweeping in to relieve King's Landing and shatter Stannis' exhausted, half-burned force. Stannis lost, retreated back to his rock at Dragonstone to brood and rage and blame the Red Priestess for not warning him. And the Lannisters won the war's decisive battle almost by the skin of their teeth. So what if the wildfire hadn't been enough? Or what if that relief force had come an hour too late? What if Stannis Baratheon took King's Landing? You get a completely different throne, and I mean completely. Because Stannis doesn't come alone. He comes with Mel Isandru, the Red Priestess, and her whole faith in the Lord of Light. So the city that, in our version, stayed nominally faithful to the old gods, and the Seven, suddenly has a king whose god is fire, whose right hand is a sorceress, who genuinely can do things, and whose idea of legitimacy runs through a burning heart on a banner. Stannis on the Iron Throne is a harder, colder, stranger regime than anything the Lannisters ran. He'd have been just rigorously, ruthlessly just in that grinding way of his. No mercy, but no corruption either. The kind of king who'd have you executed for a crime, and then execute the man who carried it out too far because both broke the rule. You wouldn't love him. You might grudgingly trust him, which is more than you could say for most of the people who sat in that chair. The Lan Aestir power structure just collapses, and early. In our timeline, the Blackwater is the moment their grip locks in. Tywin named saviour of the city. The Tyrell alliance sealed, Joffrey's rule cemented for years. Flip the battle, and all of that evaporates. Joffrey, well, we'll come to Joffrey in a minute, because he gets his own road. But a Joffrey who loses King's Landing at, 1314, is a Joffrey who doesn't get his reign of casual cruelty at all. Essuyer whole world caves in, and the Tyrells, who had just spent an enormous amount of political capital backing the Lan Aestir side, are suddenly on the wrong horse, scrambling to make peace with a fire god king who has no particular reason to forgive them. Follow it north and Robb Stark's war changes shape too, because Robb was, at that point, fighting the Lannisters. If the Lannisters are broken at the Blackwater, Robb's not fighting the same enemy anymore. He's now got to work out where he stands with a King Stannis, who considers himself the one true monarch and considers everyone who declared independence, the North very much included, to be a rebel. There's a version of that where they ally against a common enemy. There's a version where they collide. Stannis was not a man who negotiated. He informed you what the law was and expected you to fall in line. So a triumphant Stannis and a king in the north were probably always going to have words. And then there's the dragon queen sailing in eventually, into a Westeros ruled not by a hated child and his scheming mother, but by a righteous, grim, genuinely capable warrior king with a sorceress at his side and a god that answers. That's a much tougher wall for Daenerys to break herself against. Say what you like about Stannis, the man could fight a battle, and he actually believed in something, which makes him a far more dangerous opponent than the Lan Aestir court ever was. The part that lingers, though, and the reason I can't just enjoy a Stannis victory as a fun bit of strategy, is Mel Isandra and what her faith cost. Because the Lord of Light demanded things: king's blood, sacrifices, fire. In our version, Stannis' fixation on being the promised prince led him to some unforgivable places by the end. Put him on the actual throne, flush with a great victory that seemed to prove Melisandre right, and you have to wonder how much further down that road he goes when the god keeps delivering. A king who wins by fire tends to start reaching for fire to solve everything. And that's the shadow over this whole road. The rightful claimant winning doesn't make for a gentle world. It might make for a more orderly one. it does not make for a kinder one. Order and kindness, it turns out, are not the same thing, and this story never stopped reminding you of that. So the throne gets taken by the man who, on paper, most deserved it, and the realm gets a ruler who'd burn a great deal to keep it. There's a grim little lesson tucked in there about being careful what you wish for on behalf of a kingdom. But mostly, I just like imagining Stannis' face if he'd won. He'd have hated how happy everyone expected him to be about it. He'd have sat down on that horrible spiky chair, adjusted himself, and immediately started drafting laws. Which is, honestly, exactly why he'd have been better at the job than nearly anyone who actually held it. Here's one where the turning point is a cup of wine, and it lands in a darker place. So I'll say that up front. This is the road where the worst person in the entire story doesn't die. Joffrey Barath E. Hun. I don't think the show ever produced anyone more purely, effortlessly hateable, and I mean that as a compliment to everyone involved. It's genuinely hard to make an audience despise a character that thoroughly. He was cruel for the sport of it. He had Ned Stark beheaded on a whim, as we talked about right at the start. He tormented Sansa for fun, made her look at her father's head on a spike. He was the kind of boy who pulls wings off things, except the things were people, and he had a crown. And then at his own wedding feast, at the height of his power, married to Margaery Tyrell, with the whole court fawning over him, he drank from a golden chalice and choked to death in front of everyone, clawing at his own throat, purple in the face. The purple wedding, people called it after. And honestly, the collective sigh of relief from the audience probably registered on instruments. For ages, everyone assumed Tyr Eon did it. He was standing right there. He'd been publicly humiliated by Joffrey minutes earlier, and Cersei wanted him guilty so badly, she'd have invented the evidence. Tyr Eon got hauled off and put on trial for it. But it wasn't Tyr Eon. It was Olenna Tyrell, the Queen of Thorns, the sharpest, funniest, most quietly ruthless old woman in the whole show, who slipped the poison into the cup. She admitted it years later, almost as an afterthought, to Jaime, right at the end of her own life. She'd done it to save her granddaughter Margaery from a lifetime shackle to a monster, and she had, in her words, absolutely no regrets. I love Olenna, she's the best, but I digress. Now, what if she doesn't do it? What if Olenna looks at the situation, does her cold arithmetic, and decides the risk is too great, or finds another way to protect Margaery, or simply misses her window? The cup is just wine. Joffrey lives. Joffrey reigns. The first thing you get is a grim marriage. Margaery Tyrell, chained for real to a living, adult, fully empowered Joffrey. And Margaery was clever. Properly clever. One of the best players in the game. So she'd have spent years managing him, flattering him, steering him. The way you'd handle a dangerous animal you couldn't get rid of. But there's only so much steering you can do with a man like that once the crown's truly settled on his head, and he's grown into his cruelty rather than out of it. The Tyrell plan was always to marry into power and then quietly run things from behind the throne. Here they succeed at the marrying and fail at the running, because you cannot manage Joffrey, not really. You can only survive him for as long as your luck holds, and follow the thread the other way, and something important simply doesn't happen. Without Joffrey's death, there's no murder to pin on Tyr Eon, no trial, and that's an enormous branch because Tyr Eon's trial is the hinge for the road we're doing next. So I'll not spoil it here, just flag that a whole chain of consequences we're about to walk down starts with a poisoning that, in this version, never occurred. Tyr Eon's not accused, not condemned, not driven to the desperate act that scattered his family and sent him fleeing across the sea. He just carries on being the cleverest man in a court that hates him for it. Tommen, Joffrey's sweet, gentle little brother, eventually becomes king, and that matters more than it sounds, because Tommen was the soft, pliable boy the various factions could actually shape. Cersei, the Tyrells, and eventually the fanatics of the faith all got their hooks into Tommen precisely because he was kind and weak and easily led. A realm where Joffrey keeps the throne is a realm that never has a malleable boy king to fight over, which changes the entire shape of the religious upheaval that tore King's Landing apart in our timeline. The dominoes that led to a great sept full of people going up in flames. A lot of those dominoes needed Tommen on the throne to fall, keep Joffrey alive, and that whole sequence loses its footing. Cersei is the fascinating one though, because Joffrey's death broke something in her. It was the first of her children she lost, and each loss made her more dangerous, more nihilistic, more willing to burn the world down, since the world had taken so much from her. A Cersei whose firstborn lives is a Cersei with more to protect and, perhaps, marginally less to lose her mind over. Not a good person mind, never that, but possibly a less apocalyptic one, because she's not being carved hollow by grief, one child at a time. There's a bleak irony there. The survival of her monstrous son might have kept the mother a fraction more human. Or it might have made no difference at all, and she'd have found other reasons. Hard to call. And Sansa. Poor Sansa, who spent so long trapped in that court. In our version, Joffrey's death is part of what finally shakes her loose. The chaos of it. The accusation against Tyrion. All of it created the cracks she eventually slipped out through. A living Joffrey means a Sansa who stays caught in the web longer, under the thumb of a king who'd already shown her exactly how cruel he could be, and who'd promised more of it. That's a hard thing to sit with. Some of these roads free people. This one keeps a girl in a cage a good while longer. So it's a darker road, this one, no pretending otherwise. It's the version where cruelty isn't punished, where the boy who should have grown out of it grows into it instead, where a clever old woman decides not to risk her family, and in sparing herself the danger, spares the realm's worst tyrant. And what strikes me every time is how much of the story's sense of justice, that feeling you had, watching, that the awful ones eventually got theirs, rested on a single quiet act by someone who never took credit for it while it mattered. One old woman, one cup, no regrets. Take her nerve away, and the monster simply keeps his crown, and everyone else keeps flinching. Makes you appreciate Olenna even more, really. She did the thing nobody else would, and let another man take the blame, and went to her grave pleased about it. No notes. And here's the road that trial leads to. This is the one that still makes me wince years on, because it was so close, and it went wrong for the most human reason imaginable. A man wanted an apology more than he wanted to live. Tyrion, on trial for a murder he didn't commit, cornered by a court that had already decided he was guilty, did the only thing left to him. He demanded a trial by combat. Let the gods sort it out through steel. The trouble was that Cersei's champion was Greg, or Clegane, the Mountain, a man roughly the size of a small building, and about as merciful as one falling on you. Nobody wanted to fight the Mountain. Tyrion's usual sellsword mate, Bronn, took one look and politely declined. And then, out of nowhere, a champion volunteered. Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper of Dawn. Oberyn didn't do it for Tyrion, not really. He did it for his sister. Years before, during the sack of King's Landing, the Mountain had murdered Oberyn's sister, Elia, and her two small children, brutally, unforgivably, while serving as a Lan ISS to Bannerman, widely believed to be acting on Tywin Lan ISS' orders. Oberyn had waited his whole life for a chance at the man who did it, and here it was, wrapped up in someone else's trial. So he took up a spear and he danced. And that's the word for it, genuinely. He danced. He was faster than the Mountain, lighter, cleverer, and for a few glorious minutes he ran rings round the great brute, jabbing and spinning and stabbing, a wound to the chest, a slash across the back of the leg, and finally his spear driven clean through Gregor's gut, pinning him to the ground. It was won. It was over. Oberyn had beaten the Mountain, and Tyrion was as good as free, and up in the stands Jaime and Tyr Eon swapped this little disbelieving grin, like they couldn't quite believe their luck. But Oberyn didn't want the win. He wanted the confession. He wanted the whole court to hear Greg, or say Alia's name, admit what he'd done, name the man who'd ordered it. So instead of finishing him, Oberyn circled the fallen giant, shouting at him, demanding it, say her name, say you killed her, say who told you to, and he got too close. The mountain's hand shot out, took him by the leg, brought him down. And then, with the whole world watching in horror, Greg caved his skull in with his bare hands, admitting to the murder at last. Not as justice, but as a final taunt to a dying man. And because Oberyn was Tyr Eon's champion and Oberyn lost, Tyr Eon was condemned to death. So what if he'd just finished it? What if Oberyn, spear through the mountain's belly, had done the sensible thing and put the point through his throat, taken the win, saved the gloating for later? He lives, Tyr Eon is acquitted, free man walks out of that court. And this is where it gets properly tangled, because a free Tyr Eon in King's Landing is a Tyr Eon who doesn't do the thing that shaped the entire back half of his story. In our version, condemned and desperate, Tyr Eon breaks out with Jaime's help, and on his way out, he stops to murder his own father. Tywin catches him on the privy of all places, puts a crossbow bolt in him, and then he flees across the sea, and on that long, miserable exile he falls in with Varys, and Varys steers him toward Dún Isis, and Tyr Eon becomes her hand. Her clever, cynical, world-weary advisor, arguably the best thing that ever happened to her rule. None of that needs to happen if the trial goes the other way. Tyr Eon acquitted doesn't murder Tywin, Tywin lives, which on its own reshapes the whole Lannister endgame, because Tywin was the one truly competent hand on that side of the board, and his death left a vacuum sea filled with pure spite. Tyr Eon doesn't flee, doesn't meet Varys on the road, doesn't cross the sea. His entire path to the Dragon Queen just isn't there. Maybe he finds his way to her another way, eventually. Maybe he stays in the West and plays a completely different game. But the specific chain that turned a disgraced Lannister into the conscience at a conqueror's ear, that chain never forms. And I think Dún Isis is genuinely worse off for it. Because for all that people slag off his later advice, Tyr Eon was often the only voice telling her not to burn things. Dawn changes too, and for the better in the short term. A living Oberyn is a Dawn with its grievance partly answered. He got his justice. He killed the man who killed his sister. The wound that had festered for a generation finally gets lanced. In our timeline, Oberyn's death sent his lover Ellaria spiralling into a rage that led to a whole grubby cycle of Dornish revenge killings, poison, and daggers, and dead children, none of which reflected well on anyone. A satisfied Oberyn, alive and vindicated, is a far steadier presence. Dawn stays a sharper, prouder, more coherent player instead of dissolving into a revenge tragedy. But, and here's the bittersweet turn this road always ends on for me, justice being served doesn't make the world warmer, it just makes it different. You save Oberyn, you free Tyr Eon, you keep a good man alive and vindicated, and in doing it you quietly dissolve one of the great unlikely friendships of the whole story. Tyr Eon and Dún Isis, the cynic and the idealist, the pairing that so nearly worked. That relationship was built out of Tyr Eon's catastrophe. Take the catastrophe away and you take the friendship with it. So it's a win that costs something you didn't know you were spending. Which is sort of the theme of this whole exercise, now that I say it out loud. And underneath all of it, the thing I keep coming back to is that the whole tragedy turned on wanting too much. Oberyn had won. He'd actually done it. And it wasn't enough because a clean victory didn't give him the words he needed to hear. He wanted the apology, and reaching for it killed him. There's something almost unbearably human in that. The way the thing we want most can be the exact thing that undoes us, right at the moment we've already got everything we were fighting for. He was a step from walking away a hero. He just couldn't bring himself to take it. And I understand him completely, which is somehow worse. That last one always leaves me thinking about how narrow the margins are. A step too close. A cup lifted instead of set down. A blade that came down when it might have stayed put. That's really been the quiet thread running under all of these, hasn't it? Not grand destiny, not the will of the gods, whatever a red priestess might tell you. Just tiny margins and ordinary people, tired and frightened, and making a call in the moment, with no way of knowing what it would grow into. Oberyn wanted to hear one sentence. Robb wanted to marry the woman he loved. A boy climbed one tower he'd promised to leave alone. None of them were choosing the fate of a continent. They were just living their lives, in the moment, the way you do. The fate of the continent came along afterward, and attached itself to the choice without asking permission. I find that oddly comforting at this hour. It means the enormous things are usually made of small things. Which also means the small things you did today, the kind word, the thing you let go of, the door you left open, those matter more than they felt like they did. You just can't see the thread yet. Nobody ever can. Anyway, enough of that. Let's head north again, and let's go somewhere sadder and quieter, to a cold room and a body on a table, and a man everyone had rather got used to watching come back from things. This time, in this version, he doesn't. There's a cold room at Castle Black, and a body laid out on a table, stab wounds all over the chest, and a red priestess standing over it, who stopped believing in her own god. And underneath the table, where nobody's paying it any mind, a great white direwolf is dozing. Hold that image, because the whole road turns on it. Jon Snow got murdered by his own men. That's the blunt fact of it, and it's worth sitting with, because it's one of the crueler things the show ever did. He'd risen to command the Night's Watch, and he'd made the hard, correct, deeply unpopular call to let the wildlings, the free folk, the people from beyond the wall come south through the wall to safety, rather than leave them out in the cold to die and be raised as more soldiers for the dead. It was the right thing. It was obviously the right thing, and a faction of his own brothers couldn't stomach it, so they called him out into the cold on a pretext, one by one, and each of them put a knife in him. For the watch, they said. Even the boy, Ollie, a kid Jon had practically taken under his wing. That one hurt, and Jon died, properly died, out there in the snow, blood steaming on the ice. And for a little while, that was that. The great hope of the North, gone, stabbed by the very men he'd sworn to lead. What brought him back was Mel Isahundru, and it very nearly didn't happen. She'd washed up at Castle Black, a broken woman. Everything she'd believed about Stannis being the promised prince had turned to ash. Her prophecies had failed. Her faith was in tatters. When Davos, that good stubborn smuggler, asked her to try and bring Jon back, she said she couldn't. She'd seen it done, but she didn't believe she had it in her. Not anymore. Davos more or less had to talk her into simply attempting it. And she tried. The incantations, the washing of the wounds, the whole ritual, and nothing happened. She gave up. Everyone filed out of the room, heads down, defeated. And only then, in the empty quiet, did ghosts stir under the table, and Jon gasped back to life on his own schedule, the way he did everything. But what if it hadn't worked, and it so nearly didn't? What if Meli Sahundru's faith there was too far gone, or she'd refused Davos altogether, or the magic simply didn't take? What if Jon Snow stayed dead on that table? You lose the person the entire endgame was quietly arranged around, and you don't feel the full weight of it until you follow the thread all the way out. The immediate loss is the North. Without Jon, there's no one to rally the scattered northern houses and the wildlings together. No one to lead the fight to take back Winterfell from Ram-Z-Bolton. That whole desperate, muddy, magnificent battle, the one where Jon nearly gets crushed to death under his own panicking men before the Vale cavalry arrives, simply doesn't happen, because there's no Jon to lead it. The Boltons keep the north, Sansa, if she's escaped them by then, has no brother to bring an army to her side. The king in the north, that the northern lords proclaimed with such fierce love, that title has no one to give it to, and it goes so much further than the north because Jon was the bridge. He was the one who went south to meet Du Nair ISS, the one who convinced her slowly, painfully, that the war for the throne was a sideshow next to the war against the dead. He was the reason the Dragon Queen brought her strength north at all. Without Jon, who makes that case? Who gets Du Nair to point her dragons at the real enemy instead of the Iron Throne? Very possibly no one. And a Du Nair who never turns north is a world where the living face the long night without dragons in the sky, which, if you were listening earlier, you'll know is a very grim place to be indeed. I'll not go over that ground again, but it connects, and not happily. There's a deeper thread too, right at the very end of everything, and I'm going to tread carefully round it, because it belongs to our last road of the night. But I'll say this much. There was a moment at the close of the whole saga when a terrible thing needed doing, and the only person in the world positioned to do it, by blood, by love, by who he was Jon Snow. Take Jon off the board here, on this table, in the snow, and when that moment comes, there's simply nobody standing where he stood. What happens then? With no one able to make that final impossible choice, I'll leave you to turn over. We'll come back to the shape of it soon enough. What I keep landing on, with this one, is the strangeness of Jon's whole existence being so contingent. He was the character who kept surviving things, the one you assumed was protected by some narrative armour, because he always pulled through. And here's the truth of it. He pulled through this particular death by the thinnest possible margin, on the say-so of a faithless priestess who had to be badgered into trying in a room everyone had already left. If Davos hadn't pushed, if Melisandre had held onto her despair a moment longer, the great hero of the North stays a corpse on a table, murdered by frightened men for doing the right thing, and the world that needed him carries on not knowing what it lost, because it never got the chance to find out. He came back, in our version, walked out into that courtyard still stiff with his wounds, greeted his friends, hanged the men who'd killed him, including the boy, and carried on. But he so easily might not have. And a story where he doesn't is a quieter, colder, lonelier story, missing its still centre, stumbling toward an ending, with no one at the heart of it who can bear to do what the ending asks. Of all the roads tonight, this might be the one where the absence is loudest. Some people you don't notice holding everything together until they're gone. Jon was one of those. He'd have hated being told that, mind. He never once thought he was the important one, which, honestly, was rather the point of him. This is the dark one I promised you. But I want you to notice how quiet it actually is, at its centre, because for all the noise around it, the moment it turns on is almost silent. A frozen godswood. An old weirwood tree with a face carved into it. A boy in a wheelchair, waiting. Here's the night as it happened. The whole war for the throne, all the scheming and betrayal we've been unpicking for the last hour, all of it got put on hold, because the actual enemy finally arrived. The army of the dead came down on Winterfell in the largest, darkest battle the show ever staged, and the living had worked out that the whole undead host was tied to one figure, the Night King, the pale thing that led them. Kill him, and every corpse he'd ever raised would drop. So the plan, desperate as it was, came down to bait. They put Bran out in the Godswood. Bran, who by then had become the keeper of the world's memory, the one thing the Night King most wanted to snuff out. And they waited for the enemy to come to him. And come he did, once everything else had failed. The battle went about as badly as a battle can go. The dead poured over the walls, the defenders fell one by one, and out in the Godswood, Theon Greyjoy made his last stand. Theon, who'd spent the whole story betraying and being broken, and trying to claw his way back to being a good man. Finally getting there. Bran told him simply, "You're a good man. Thank you." and Theon charged the Night King with a spear, and the Night King snapped it and ran him through, and that was Theon, redeemed and dead in the same breath. Then it was just the Night King walking slowly through the snow toward a defenceless boy, drawing the sword off his back, and Bran looked up at the thing that had hunted him across the world, not with fear, but with something closer to pity. And at the last possible instant, Arya came out of the dark, leapt at him from behind with a dagger. He caught her by the throat in mid-air, and by the wrist, and for one heartbeat it looked finished. And then she let the blade drop from the caught hand, caught it with her other, and drove it up into him, and he shattered, burst apart into a scatter of ice, and every White Walker with him, and every white across the whole field dropped in the same instant. The long night over in a single strike. The blade she used, by the way, was that same Valyrian steel dagger, the beautiful cat's paw knife from all those years and all those seasons ago, the one sent to murder Bran in his sickbed, the one his mother carried south, asking who it belonged to. It travelled the entire length of the story and ended up in Arya's hand at the one moment it could save the world. I don't know if that was always planned or just a lovely accident, but I've never stopped being charmed by it. So what if she doesn't reach him though? What if one of his lieutenants catches the wind of her a half-second sooner, or she slips on the ice, or he simply holds on to that throat a moment longer? The dagger falls into the snow, and the Night King turns, and he kills Bran. And the living lose, not just the battle, everything. Because there was no second plan. There was never a second plan. The Night King was the linchpin, and once he's driven that sword through the boy, there's no one left to stop him, and nothing left to try. Winterfell falls completely. Every defender who dies that night, and by that point in the battle, that's very nearly all of them, gets up again as one more soldier in his host. The greatest fighters of the age, the ones who'd survived everything the story had thrown at them, rising with those pale dead eyes to join the thing that killed them. And then the dead go south. That's the part that hollows me out quietly, because down south, at that exact moment, everyone who matters is still busy with the chair, still scheming over King's Landing, still counting armies, still playing the game as though the game were the point, and rolling toward them through the snow, growing with every town it passes, is a tide that does not scheme and cannot be bargained with and only ever gets bigger. Every argument about legitimacy, every clever alliance, every hard-won bit of political ground, all of it revealed in one long, silent winter to have been utterly beside the point. They spent the whole story fighting over who got to rule the world, and the world quietly ended behind their backs while they did it. The thing the Night King actually wanted, underneath the conquest, was erasure. Not to rule, to wipe the slate blank, to end memory itself, so that it would be as if none of it had ever been. I talked earlier about what Bran had become, the living record of everything, so I'll not go over it again, but that's why the boy in the Godswood was always the real target, and it's why his death here isn't just a death. It's the beginning of the world forgetting itself, a long white silence settling over everything that was ever done, or loved, or fought for, until there's no one left to remember that any of it happened at all. I want to keep this one soft, because it's meant to send you off, not keep you up. So let me say the gentle version of it. This is the road that never was, thank goodness. Arya did reach him. The dagger did find its mark. The dead did fall, but it's worth visiting, just once in the dark, because it throws everything else into relief. All those other roads we've walked tonight, the wars and the weddings and the poisoned cups, they only mattered because somebody won this night. The squabble over the throne was only ever a story worth telling because the living got to keep living. Take that away, let the Godswood go quiet the wrong way, and none of the rest of it means anything, because there's no one left to argue about it. Which is, in a strange way, a kind of comfort. It means that for all the show's cynicism, for all its betrayals and its cruelty, the whole thing rested in the end on a single act of courage in the snow. One person, One blade, 1/2 second. Everything hung on that. And it held. It didn't have to, but it held. Rest easy on that one. The night ended. Dawn came. It very nearly didn't. And that's exactly why it's worth being glad it did. And so we come to the last road, and I've saved it for the end on purpose, because it's the one that hurts the most and, oddly, the one that ends up somewhere closest to gentle. This is the big one. The one people still argue about. The one where a city full of people who'd already surrendered burned anyway. Let me set it up as fairly as I can, because it matters. By the end, Daenerys had lost almost everything that had ever anchored her. She'd crossed the sea, won her wars, marched north, spent her strength and her dragons and her armies helping to fight a war that wasn't even hers, against the dead. And it had cost her terribly. She'd lost friends, lost a dragon, lost her closest advisor's faith in her one by one. And then, right before the end, she lost Missandei, her dearest friend in all the world, the one person who'd been with her since her campaign in the slave cities. Cersei's forces took Missandei prisoner and executed her on the walls of King's Landing, beheaded her in front of Daenerys ISS and everyone, and Missandei's last word was Drukaris, the command for dragonfire, flung down at her queen like a final gift, or a curse, or both. That was the last thread. After that, something in Daenerys let go, so the armies gathered outside King's Landing, and Daenerys came down on the city on her last dragon. And here's the moment the whole thing turns on. The plan, the mercy, the last hope, it was the bells. If the city surrendered, the bells of King's Landing would ring out, and that would be the signal to stop. Total, unconditional surrender. No need to burn anything. And the bells rang. The city gave up. The soldiers threw down their weapons. The people cowered in their homes. The bells pealed out across the rooftops saying, "It's over. You've won. Please, no more." And Daenerys, sitting astride her dragon above a city that had just laid itself at her feet, chose fire anyway, burned it, street by street, the surrendered and the innocent, and the children, all of it. A whole city turned to ash and screaming while the bells were still ringing. It's one of the most upsetting sequences the show ever committed to, and it was meant to be. And it's what forced the final tragedy. Jon Snow, who loved her, who by blood was the one person with a claim and a closeness that let him get near enough. Jon held her and told her he loved her and put a knife in her heart because he could see no other way to stop what she'd become. That's the moment I hinted at earlier, the one only Jon could do. This is where that thread pays out. So what if she'd listened to the bells? What if, in that suspended instant above the city, with the sound rising up to her, the woman who'd spent her whole life freeing people, rather than burning them, had heard the surrender for what it was and held? Or take it back a step, what if Missandei had lived, and that final thread of restraint had never snapped, and Daenerys had arrived at those walls still herself? You get the queen she always meant to be. That's the ache of it. Because for most of her story, Daenerys genuinely was the thing she believed herself to be. A breaker of chains, someone who walked into slaver cities and freed the people in them, and was loved for it, actually loved, in a story where almost nobody was. The tragedy was never that she was secretly a monster all along. It's that she was pushed and grieved and isolated and frightened right up to a line. And then, in one catastrophic moment, she stepped over it. Pull the moment back, let her hold, and she takes the throne as the liberator. The city stands. The people she told herself she was saving actually get saved. She becomes the queen the whole long journey was supposed to be leading toward. And Jon never has to make the choice that destroyed him. This is the part that gets me, honestly, because Jon killing Daenerys wasn't a triumph. It broke him completely. He'd murdered the woman he loved, his own queen, his own blood, to stop a horror, and there was no version of living with that. It's why the story sent him away at the end, back beyond the wall, into a kind of exile that was half punishment and half mercy. Take the burning away, and that whole ending unravels in the loveliest possible direction. There's no city of ash, no knife, no kinslaying under a throne room snowed with cinders, no sending John off alone into the cold to carry a thing no one should have to carry. He gets to just be, to live, to not have done the worst thing a person can do to someone they love. Here's where it all ties together, and it's the thread that's been running quietly under every single road tonight. So let me finally say it plainly. Strip away the dragons and the schemes and the ice, and the story kept circling one thing. Not who wins the chair, but who each person decides to become once the world has taken everything else off the table. Ned held on to honour even as it got him killed. Robb followed his heart straight into a trap. Oberyn couldn't let go of the apology he was owed. And Darnea Is, who freed slaves and broke chains, and was loved for it across half a world, finished above a city she chose to burn. That's the tragedy. Not that she was evil, that she'd been merciful 100 times and cruel just once. And the once was the time that mattered. The time with a whole city underneath her. This road is the one where mercy wins the last round too, where the breaker of chains stays a breaker of chains, right to the end. And I won't pretend it's a simple happy ending, because nothing here ever is, and because there's something almost unbearable about how close the real version came to being this one. The bells actually rang, the surrender actually happened, everything was in place for mercy. She just didn't. By that thinner margin, a step too close again in its own way. The same lesson as all the others, the thinnest of margins, and one exhausted, grieving person making a call and not thinking straight, deciding the fate of thousands in a heartbeat they'll never get back. But tonight, in this version, she hears them. The bells ring out over a city that gets to keep standing, and a queen high above it lowers her head and listens and holds. And somewhere down in the streets, a man who loves her doesn't have to become the thing that stops her. They get to walk out of it together, into whatever comes next, both of them still themselves. It's the gentlest road of the 10, and it's the one the story came a single heartbeat from actually taking. Of all the doors we've opened tonight, that's the one I'd most like to leave standing open. Just for a while. Just for the length of a night's sleep. We could stop there really. 10 roads, 10 doors, that was the plan. But it's still dark out, and I'm not remotely done thinking about this world. So if you're still with me, or even if you're half gone, drifting, only catching one word in 3, let's keep wandering a bit. No new what-ifs. Just some threads I want to pull loose and look at, quietly. The way you turn something over in your hands late at night when you can't sleep and don't especially want to. Here's one that's been nagging at me all through this. Every road we walked tonight turned on somebody important. A king, a queen, a lord, a champion. The people history bothers to remember. But the more I think about Westeros, the more I reckon the whole thing was actually held up by people nobody was counting at all. The ones without claims or crowns or songs written about them. And they never get a what if, because nobody ever imagines the world without them. But you should, because the world without them would have fallen over a dozen times. Take Davos Seaworth, we mentioned him earlier, badgering a priestess into trying a resurrection she'd given up on. Davos started as a smuggler, a criminal, lowborn, no education, couldn't read until he was middle-aged and got a little girl to teach him. And yet Davos is, quietly, one of the most decent and useful people in the entire story. He's the one who keeps saying the sensible, humane thing when everyone grand around him is losing the plot. Half the good decisions in the back half of the show happen because Davos was in the room being stubborn about people's lives mattering. There's no throne he wants, no prophecy about him. He's just a good man with a practical head, and the story leans on him again and again without ever quite acknowledging how much. Or Samwell Tarly. Sam's the soft one, the frightened one, the fat boy his own father was ashamed of, packed off to the wall to get him out of the way, and Sam ends up being the one who reads. That sounds like nothing. It is not nothing. In a world sliding toward a war against the dead, the person who sits in our dusty libraries actually reading the old books, digging up the forgotten knowledge about how any of this was ever fought before. That person is worth more than most of the armies. Sam's the one who finds things out. He's the closest thing that world had to a scientist, and he was treated as a joke for most of his life. I've got a lot of time for Sam. The meek do a fair bit of the load-bearing in this story, and probably in ours. And then there's a whole layer beneath even them. The masters, in their grey robes, keeping records in every castle in the land. The ones who marked down when the seasons turned, who tended the ravens that carried every message, who quietly maintained the entire nervous system of the realm, while lords rode about having feelings, the septons and sceptres holding together what passed for comfort and meaning for ordinary people, the servants who kept the great halls running, the cooks, the stable hands, the nameless soldiers on the walls. None of them get a road tonight, none of them get remembered. But pull any one layer of them out, and the whole grand drama grinds to a halt, because it turns out you cannot fight a war of succession if there's nobody to shoe the horses, or carry the letters, or grow the food. There's a lad called Hot Pie, if you remember him, a baker's boy Arya travelled with for a while. He drops out of the story to go and work in an inn, making bread, and everyone sort of chuckles about it, this minor character who just wanted to bake. But I think about Hot Pie more than is probably reasonable, because he's the one who worked out something most of the highborn characters never did, that there's a life to be had that isn't about the game at all. You can just make bread. You can be good at a small, warm, useful thing and stay out of the way of the swords and survive and feed people. In a story absolutely drowning in ambition, the kid who opted out to bake is one of the only people who ends up genuinely content. There's a whole philosophy in that, if you want one. I'm not sure the show meant to put it there, but it's there, and this connects to the thing I find most quietly radical about the whole saga, now that I've spent an hour picking it apart in the dark. For all the dragons and prophecy and grand destiny, the moments that actually mattered were almost never the grand ones. They were a smuggler being decent, a frightened boy reading a book, an old woman making a hard choice with a cup of wine, a baker deciding he'd rather make bread than war. The story dressed itself up in kings and fire, but underneath it kept quietly insisting that the world runs on ordinary people doing ordinary, stubborn, decent things, mostly unthanked, mostly unrecorded, which is, I think, a rather lovely thing to fall asleep on. Because you're one of those people, wherever you are, whatever unglamorous, unrecorded, load-bearing thing you did today that nobody thanked you for. The world runs on that. It ran on it in Westeros and it runs on it here. No dragons required. Just people, quietly holding things up, while the ones who get remembered strut about in the foreground, thinking it's all down to them. Anyway, that one got away from me a bit. Let's wander somewhere else. Since we're in the mood for it, let's talk about endings and about the difference between the people who put down roots and the people who ride off. Right at the very close of everything, once the wars were done, and the ash had settled and the survivors were divvying up what was left, the story gave its handful of remaining Starks 3 completely different endings. And I've always thought the 3 of them together say something worth sitting with. Sansa becomes queen in the north, staying home, ruling the place she'd fought so hard to get back to. Bran ends up on a throne in the south, of all things, the boy who fell from the tower, presiding over what remained of the realm. And Arya, who could have had a castle, a title, a comfortable life owed to her a dozen times over, Arya got on a ship and sailed west of Westeros, off the edge of every map anyone had ever drawn, to find out what was out there, because nobody knew, because no one had ever come back to say. I love that ending for her, and I've thought a lot about why. Arya spent the entire story being made into a weapon. Grief and loss and training sharpened her into something deadly, a girl with a list of names and the skills to cross every one of them off. And she did, or at least most of them. And when it was done, when the last name was crossed off and the wars were won and she could finally stop, the question became, who are you when you're not the weapon anymore? What's left when the vengeance is spent? And her answer was to point herself at the horizon and go find something new. Not to settle into the shape the world had beaten her into, to become something the world didn't have a name for yet. Now here's the thing, and it ties back to everything we've done tonight. That's an ending, but it needn't have been the only one. There's another road right alongside it though. Picture the Arya who doesn't sail, who looks at that ship and thinks, no, I've been running and fighting my whole life. I've been cold and alone and pointed at the next kill for as long as I can remember. What if for once I just stayed? An Arya who stays is an Arya who gets to be a sister again, who sits at her sister's table in the north, in the home they nearly lost forever, in the walls their family bled for, who watches her brother rule from the south and rolls her eyes about it in letters, who gets to grow old somewhere warm and safe with the two people left in all the world who share her blood and her memories, the only two who remember what the house sounded like when it was full. There's a version of her ending that isn't about the horizon at all. It's about the hearth, about finally, after everything, being still. And I genuinely can't tell you which is the happier one. That's what makes it a real fork, and not just a wrong turn, because for some people, and I think Arya was one of them, staying still would be its own kind of death. She'd have gone quietly mad in a comfortable castle, itching at the walls, mourning a war that at least gave her something to point herself at. The horizon was her happy ending precisely because it never stopped moving. But for another version of the same girl, worn out and grieving and desperate for something that lasts, the hearth would have been the dream. Roots instead of the road. A door that closes gently behind you and stays closed, with the people you love on the right side of it. I go back and forth on it, honestly. Some nights the ship is the beautiful ending, and the castle is the trap. Other nights it's the reverse, the ship is just running dressed up as freedom. And the real courage would have been to stay, to trust the quiet, to believe you'd earned the right to stop. I don't think there's a correct answer. I think it depends entirely on who you are, and maybe on which night you're asking, and maybe on how tired you are when the question comes. And that's true far beyond Westeros, isn't it? That's just the choice, the one nearly everyone faces some version of. Do you go or do you stay? Do you chase the thing over the horizon, or do you build something and put down roots and trust that enough is enough? The story didn't pretend one was right. It gave its sisters two different answers and let them both be true, and let them both be a kind of happiness. And I've always found that unexpectedly wise for a show mostly famous for killing people at weddings. Wherever you land on it, the ship or the hearth, the road or the roots, I hope you get to choose it rather than have it chosen for you, which is more than most of the people in this story ever managed. Most of them didn't pick their endings. Their endings were handed to them by wars and betrayals and other people's ambitions. Arya, right at the last, got to actually choose hers. She pointed herself at the unknown edge of the world and went because she wanted to, because nothing was chasing her and nothing was owed. That's the rarest thing in the whole saga when you think about it. Not a dragon, not a throne, a person, at the end of everything, freely choosing where to go next. That's the real magic. Everything else was just set dressing. Here's a thing I think about more than the dragons, if I'm honest. The chair, the Iron Throne itself. The whole story is named after the game for the throne, more or less. The Game of Thrones, the throne being that famous ugly heap of a chair, all welded together swords, supposedly forged from the blades of 1,000 defeated enemies in the fire of a dragon, back at the very beginning of Targaryen rule. It's meant to be uncomfortable to sit on. That was the point of it, apparently. A king should never sit easy. And for the entire length of the saga, everything we've talked about tonight, all of it, is people scheming and killing and betraying and burning, generation after generation, to get their backside onto that specific, uncomfortable chair. Ned died over that chair, in a roundabout way. Robb marched over it. Stannis sailed his fleet at it. Joffrey squirmed about on it being horrible. Cersei clawed her way onto it. Daenerys crossed an entire ocean and burned a city for it. Whole houses were extinguished for it. Whole regions bled dry. Tens of thousands of people who never wanted anything to do with it died in wars fought in its name. It's genuinely one of the great engines of misery in the whole story, this chair, and hardly anyone ever stops to ask whether it was worth it, because wanting it was just the water they all swam in. Of course you want the throne. What else would you want? And then, right at the very end, after everything, after the city burned and the queen fell and the whole blood-soaked contest was finally, exhaustingly over, the last dragon, Drogon, comes to the throne room. His mother's dead on the floor, killed over exactly this, and he nudges her and he grieves in that terrible animal way, and then he turns to the thing that killed her. Not the man who held the knife, the chair. He seems to understand, in whatever way a dragon understands anything, that the real murderer in the room isn't a person at all. It's the throne. It's the wanting of it. And he breathes fire and melts it. Just melts the whole thing into slag. The Iron Throne, the object at the centre of everything, the prize 100 years of people destroyed themselves and each other to sit on, reduced to a puddle of glowing metal by a grieving animal who grasped something none of the humans ever quite did. I think that might be my favourite single moment in the entire show, and it's not close, because it's the story finally saying the quiet part out loud. The chair was never the answer. The chair was the disease. Every person who wanted it badly enough to hurt people for it was already lost, and the ones who came closest to winning it, Cersei, Daenerys, were destroyed by the wanting more surely than by any enemy. And a dumb beast, a creature everyone treated as a weapon, was the only one in the end with the clarity to look at the thing and understand it needed to not exist. There's a bigger, stranger what-if buried in that too, so let me offer it gently as we drift. What if there'd never been a throne to want? What if that ugly welded chair had never been forged at all? No single seat that made the whole continent into one enormous prize to be fought over. Just separate kingdoms, getting on with their separate business, no ultimate crown to consolidate all that ambition into one poisonous point. Would there have been less blood? Maybe. Probably. Or maybe people would simply have found other things to destroy each other over, because that seems to be a thing people reliably do. Thrones or no thrones. Hard to say. I lean toward thinking the chair made it worse. That by inventing one seat that meant everything, they turned every generation's ambition into a single knife pointed at the whole realm's throat. What actually happened in the end is almost sweeter for how modest it is. After the throne was melted, they didn't forge a new one. The lords gathered, and instead of another all-powerful king, they cobbled together something clumsier and more human. They'd choose their ruler, going forward, from among themselves, rather than let it pass down a bloodline by force. It's not presented as some perfect solution. It's a bit awkward, a bit compromised, people bickering in a circle. But there's no giant iron chair at the centre of it anymore. Nothing designed to be uncomfortable. Nothing forged in dragon fire from the swords of the dead. Just people trying to work out how to share the load, having finally learned, at a cost that doesn't bear thinking about, that a single seat everyone kills for might not be worth having in the first place. So the thing the whole story was named after, the object at the dead centre of every road we walk tonight, ends as a puddle on the floor, mourned by no one. And I find that oddly peaceful. All that wanting, all those years, all those dead. And in the end, the chair goes first, and the world carries on without it. And it turns out you didn't need the terrible thing after all. You never did. Sleep on that one. There's a lot of comfort in it, if you let there be. Let's go all the way back to the very beginning for this one. Right back to the first hour, before any of it went wrong. Because there's a small quiet moment at the start of the whole story that I think about every time I reach the end of it. And it's a gentle place to rest for a while. In the very first episode, before the wars, before any of the deaths we've spent the night unpicking, the Stark family's out riding and they come across a dead direwolf in the snow. A great beast killed and huddled against her body are her pups, orphaned, still alive, mewling for warmth. And there are exactly as many pups as there are Stark children. Ned's first instinct is the practical, hard one. The mother's dead. The pups will starve. Kinder to end it now. But the children plead, and John points out the thing that changes his father's mind. The direwolf is the sigil of their house, and here are the same number of pups as there are true-born Stark kids. It's an omen, he says, and then as they're leaving, John finds a sixth pup, off on its own, the runt of the litter, white, an albino, the odd one out. And that one, everyone agrees, belongs to John. The bastard. The one who wasn't quite counted among the true-born children. Even the wolves sorted themselves that way, so each Stark child got a wolf. And here's the thing that quietly guts me, looking back. The wolves' fates tracked the children's almost exactly, uncannily so, as though the whole tragedy of the family was written into that first snowy morning, and nobody could read it yet. Sansa's wolf, Lady, was the first to go. Killed early, unfairly, put down over a mess that wasn't even her doing, a political nothing involving Joffrey. And Sansa, of all the Stark children, was the one who spent the longest with her true nature, muzzled, forced to be gentle and courtly and obedient in a court full of predators, her instincts leashed. Her wolf died first, and she spent years without her claws. Robb's wolf, Grey Wind, went to war with him, fought beside him, and died with him, killed at the Red Wedding, and mutilated in that same grim spectacle. The king and his wolf, cut down together. Rickon's wolf died as Rickon's whole storyline died, off to the side, brutal and brief. Bran's wolf, Summer, died defending him beyond the wall, in the cold, protecting the boy, while he became something more than a boy. And Jon's wolf, Ghost, the white runt, the odd one out, Ghost survived. Of course Ghost survived, quiet and loyal, and a bit apart from everything, like his master. And at the very end, Ghost goes north with Jon, beyond the wall, into the true cold, the two odd ones, out heading off together, into the only place either of them ever really belonged. And then there's Arya's wolf, Nymeria, and this is the one I want to leave you on, because it's the loveliest of the lot. Early in the story, to protect Nymeria from being killed over another one of Joffrey's tantrums, Arya drove her wolf away, threw stones at her, screamed at her, did the cruelest kind thing you can do, forced her beloved companion to run off into the wild so she wouldn't be put down. And everyone assumed that was the end of Nymeria. But it wasn't. Years later, Arya crosses paths with her again in the woods, except now Nymeria's enormous, wild, the leader of her own great pack, utterly free, feared across the riverlands. And Arya, who'd half hoped to bring her home, understands in a heartbeat that Nymeria can't come back. That's not who she is anymore. She's not a pet. She's something the world doesn't get to own. And Arya just says, quietly, "That's not you," and lets her go. Again. Which is, if you've been listening, the exact same ending Arya gave herself. The wolf that couldn't be tamed, that pointed itself at the wild, and never looked back. And years later, the girl does precisely the same thing, sails off the edge of the map to be something no one can put a leash on. The pup in the snow was the whole story of her right there at the start, and nobody could have known. I don't think any of that was accident. Or maybe it was, and it's just the kind of pattern our tired brains love to find in things at 1 a.m. Either way, it's a beautiful bit of quiet architecture, 6 pups in the snow, and the shape of everything to come already curled up inside them, waiting. You'd never have spotted it that first morning. It just looked like children being given puppies. That's usually how it goes with the important moments. They rarely look important while they are happening. They just look like an ordinary snowy morning, and a family stopping on the road, and a boy finding one extra small white wolf that nobody else had noticed, off on its own, waiting to be counted. Before we start winding down, one last thought, because I think it's worth saying out loud, quietly, at the end of a night spent doing exactly this. There's a way of looking at what-ifs that's all regret. If only they'd done this. If only that hadn't happened. And you can absolutely do the whole exercise in that key, mourning the endings that hurt, rewriting the deaths that landed wrong, fixing the choices that made you shout at the screen. But that's not really what tonight was, and it's not why I like doing this. Because none of these roads were about fixing anything. They were about understanding it. You lift a thread out, gently, and you look at what it was holding up, and you put it back, and you love the whole thing a little more, for having seen how it was made. That's not regret. That's closer to affection. It's how you spend time with a story you're fond of, not by wishing it were different, but by wondering about it, turning it over, keeping it company. And the thing that gets me about every person we've talked about tonight, the ones you root for and the ones you can't stand alike, is that not one of them thought of themselves as the bad guy of the story. Each had a reason that held together perfectly from where they were standing. The choices only look like mistakes from out here, with the whole map spread flat and the endings already known. In the moment, in the dark, mid-decision, every one of them was just doing the best they could see how to. That's the unsettling part. It's also the most human part. The what-ifs don't judge any of that. They just quietly show you what happens when the same person, with the same reasons, meets a slightly different moment. A da near is who hears the bells is the same woman as the one who didn't. She's not better. She's not more virtuous. She just caught a different second. That's what I find so oddly gentle about all this. It takes the weight off. It stops you seeing these people as good or evil and lets you see them as what they actually were. People in moments, making calls, not one of them able to see the thread running out from under their feet toward everything that came after. And I think that's why stories like this matter, and why we keep telling them and retelling them and lying awake wondering about them. Not because they teach us lessons exactly, but because they let us practice the thing that's hardest in our own lives, looking at a choice and a person and understanding how it all fit together, with the calm you only ever get from a safe distance. You can't do that with your own life. You're too close and the thread's still running, but you can do it with the story. You can stand at that safe distance and watch how one small choice became an enormous consequence, and feel for a moment like the whole shape of a life is something a person could actually hold and understand. That's the real reason these might have beens are worth wandering through. Not to fix anything, just to spend a little while in a place where the whole pattern is finally visible, all at once, the way it never is when you're the one living inside it. Right, that's the last of the big thoughts. Let's bring it home. One more, and then we'll sleep, because I can't do a whole night on this story and not talk about Brienne of Tarth. She never got a what-if tonight, and I realised that's because I couldn't bear to imagine her story going any other way. So instead, let me just tell you why she matters, quietly, as a last thing to rest on. Brienne wanted her whole life to be a knight. Simple as that. Not a lord, not a queen. No interest in the chair we spent so long on earlier. She just wanted to be a true knight, to swear the vows, to protect the weak, to be good in the specific, old-fashioned, faintly ridiculous way the song's promised knights were supposed to be. And the world would not let her have it because she was a woman, and the rules said women couldn't be knights, and the rules didn't much care that she was braver and more honourable and a better fighter than almost every man who got the title handed to him for being born correctly. She was mocked for it her entire life. Big, awkward Brienne who took the vows nobody would let her formally swear, and then just kept them anyway. Kept them better than the people allowed to make them. Protected the people she'd promised to protect through everything, at enormous cost, getting nothing back but more mockery. And then, on the night before the great battle with the dead, the very night we visited earlier, the one everyone expected not to survive, there's this small scene by a fire, a handful of them drinking, waiting for the end, and it comes up that Brienne, after everything, has never been knighted. Can't be. Woman, and Jaime Lan Istia, of all people, Jaime, who started the whole story, as about as far from an honourable knight as you could get, stands up and points out that any knight can make another knight, and asks her to kneel. And he knights her, there by the fire, on what everyone assumes is the last knight of the world, Sir Brienne of Tarth. And her face, I'll not describe it, because you should just go and watch it, but her face in that moment is the whole reason people loved this show, underneath all the cruelty. A person getting the one thing they'd been told their whole life they couldn't have, from someone who finally saw them clearly, on the eve of the end. She survives the night, as it happens, and right at the very close of everything, there's one more small moment that I think about constantly. There's a book in King's Landing, the White Book, where the deeds of the members of the King's Guard are recorded. Each knight gets a page, and their great acts get written in it, and the empty space at the bottom of a page is a kind of quiet judgment on a life not fully lived. And Jaime's page had been left half empty, because for all his skill, he'd mostly been remembered for the one dishonourable thing. And at the end, it's Brienne, now serving in the King's Guard herself, the thing she dreamed of, finally, officially, who sits down with his page and finishes it, fills in the empty space, writes down all the good he actually did, the parts history was going to forget, and completes the record of a man the world had mostly given up on. It's an act of pure generosity. He'd hurt her and left her, and she sits down and writes him the honourable ending he never quite earned, but that she, of all people, could see he'd been reaching for. There's no what if I want to do to that. That's the point of Brienne, in a story absolutely stuffed with people chasing power they didn't need and destroying themselves to get it. She's the one who only ever wanted to be good, in the plainest sense of the word, and who, against every rule and every mockery, actually managed it. She's the quiet answer to the whole game. You don't need the chair, you don't need the crown or the dragons or the vengeance. You can just decide to keep your vows even when nobody will let you swear them, and protect the people you promised to protect, and finish the page of someone who couldn't finish it himself. That's a whole life, right there. A good one. Maybe the only unambiguously good one in the lot. So that's who I want to leave in your head as you drift off. Not a king, not a queen. A knight nobody would knight, who was a knight the whole time anyway, and got to hear someone finally say it out loud by a fire on the coldest night of the world. Rest on that. It's a kind one. Actually, one genuinely last thing. And it's a small one, so it won't keep you. Every great house in Westeros had words. A motto, stitched under the sigil. And the lovely detail is how many of them turned out to be less like slogans and more like quiet prophecies about the people who carried them. The Stark said, "Winter is coming," which everyone in the warm south treated as gloomy northern nonsense. A bit of doom-mongering from people who lived too far up the map. And it wasn't a threat or a boast at all. It was a warning, a patient, generations-deep warning that the cold thing would come back, and you'd best not get comfortable, and you'd best remember. The one house whose words were actually true, and the one house nobody listened to. That tracks, honestly. The Lannisters had the famous one, a Lannister always pays his debts, which wasn't even their real motto, just a thing people said about them, half in fear, because they always did pay, in gold when they liked you, and in blood when they didn't. The Greyjoys, off on their miserable wet islands, said, "We do not sow," which is a strange thing to be proud of when you think about it. We don't grow things, we take them, and it explained the whole doomed shape of them in 4 words. And the Targaryens, the Dragon House, said fire and blood, which sounded magnificent for centuries, and turned out, right at the very end, above a burning city, to be a promise nobody should have wanted kept. And then there's the phrase that wasn't a house at all, the one from across the sea, that ran under so much of Arya's story. Valar Morghulis, all men must die, grim on its face. But it came with an answer, a reply you were meant to give. Valar Dohaeris, all men must serve. And I've always thought those two together were the closest the whole story came to a thesis. Yes, everything ends, everyone dies, no crown, and no dragon changes that. So the only question left, the one the whole saga kept circling, is what you do with the middle bit. Who you serve, what you're for. All men must die, fine, granted, nothing to be done about it. All men must serve. That's the part you actually get a say in. Not a bad thought to carry down into sleep, that. Everything ends, so be gentle with the middle of it. Lovely how a story about dragons kept quietly saying the plainest, kindest things if you listened under the noise. Right, now I really am done. Let's bring it home properly. So there we are, 10 roads and a good few wanders off the side of them, and the nights got late while we did it. Let's not rush the ending. We started on the steps of a great marble sept, with a blade that came down when it might have stayed put, and a father who might have gone to the wall instead of the grave. We climbed the broken tower at Winterfell with a boy who'd promised not to. We sat through a wedding that never turned to slaughter and stood at a dawn where 3 stone eggs stayed cold. We watched a grim, righteous king take a throne he'd have hated to enjoy, and a monster keep his crown because an old woman lost her nerve, and a good man win a fight and then lose it by wanting one word too many. We let the great hope of the North stay dead on a cold table. We stood in a frozen godswood and imagined the dawn not coming. And we finished above a burning city that, in one gentler version, got to keep on standing while the bells rang out. None of them are the real story. The real story went the way it went, blade and all. But I don't think the point was ever to pick a better one. The point was just to notice how much every moment weighed, how a whole world could hang off a step taken too close, a cup lifted instead of set down, a boy who found one extra white wolf in the snow. Every single one of these people mattered, not because of crowns or claims or dragons, but simply because they were there in the moment, making the call, with no idea the whole thing was resting on them. Because underneath the dragons and the thrones and the cold, this was never really about any of that. It was about people, and about what they reach for once everything else has been stripped away. That's the thing worth taking off to sleep with you, I reckon. Not who ended up on which chair, but how much weight sat in the small human moments nobody clocked as the important ones. And all these versions we've spun tonight, the ones that never happened, they don't just vanish because we made them up. They sit a little way off to the side of the real thing, close enough to reach if you let yourself go quiet enough, which at this hour you very much should. So, wherever you've got to by now, warm, hopefully, somewhere quiet, let the whole lot go loose. None of tonight needs keeping. There's no test in the morning. And if you feel like wandering through another one of these some other night, it'll be right here, exactly as we left it. If you drifted off somewhere back there, during the dragons, maybe, or the wolves in the snow, then good. That's the idea. And if you're still here at the very end, then thank you for the company. It's a nicer thing to wonder about all this out loud than on your own. Rest now. The game's done, the chair's a puddle on the floor, and the wolves have gone north where they were always meant to be. Whatever roads tomorrow puts in front of you, and whatever ones you walk straight past, and there'll be a fair few of both, I hope the ones you pick take you somewhere kind. Good night.